In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to use set and interval notation when we are describing the domain and range for a piecewise function. As you can see in number 6, we have a piecewise function on this graph. And so to do the domain, we're actually going to take this vertical line here, and we're going to move from left to right to say where this graph is touching x values. And so if you look at the line, the very top one, right here, you can see that this line continues on, right? So all the way across my room right now, or your computer screen, if you kept going, I would be touching x values, because that line continues on forever. So if you ask where we start touching x values, well, we go way over here, forever and ever, so what would we call that? That would be negative infinity. So we start touching at negative infinity, and we're touching values for x, because that means, what I mean by touching is that we actually have a line, some points that are on that spot for the x values. So as I go across, I'm still touching x values. See all that? Where I stop touching x values is right here with this open circle. And so I like to start with my interval notation first. You can choose whichever one you like. But my interval, I would say I start touching at negative infinity. And remember, we use the parentheses with infinity. And then I stop touching at whatever this x value is right here. And that would be negative 4 on the x-axis. So I stop touching at negative 4. And since it's an open circle, I'll use a parenthesis. Now hopefully you'll notice that I do keep touching. As I keep moving this line across my x values, I start touching red again right here. And that spot is at x equals negative 3. And so I'm going to have a union because I start touching again. And because that's a closed circle, I'll use a bracket. So it starts at negative 3. And then I see how far this line goes. So I'm going across. Right here, it doesn't seem like I'm touching, but remember, this line goes on forever. So I'm touching to positive infinity. That's how I would do the interval notation for the domain. And hopefully you remember doing the parentheses and brackets with the last lesson, so that kind of makes sense for you. If I want to do set notation, we always say values of x such that, and then we're writing this as an inequality. So what I like to do is I like to actually look at where my circle is for my first line. Here's my circle, and I'm working left to right again, so my first circle left to right. This is happening, the circle on the x values is at negative 4. So x is not equal to negative 4. It's either going to be less than negative 4 or greater than negative 4. And since my values are going this way, I would say x is less than negative 4. And then I see that I'm going to have more that I need to deal with over here. So I'm going to say or, and I again look for my circle, and I see that this is happening at negative 3. So x is either going to be, it's not equal to because the line keeps going, so it's either going to be greater than negative 3 or less than or equal to negative 3. Since my line is going this direction, I would say x is greater than or equal to negative 3. So that's my set notation for that problem. Range then, I'm going to erase my work here for domain, and to do the range, we do our range for the y values and we work bottom to top. So I'm going to use my purple dashed line here, so we'll get this green one out of the way. In my range, I start down here at negative infinity. That's where we always start. So as you can tell by the arrow I still have on there, I'm touching at negative infinity. So if I wanted to start my domain values, my range values for interval notation, I would say it starts at negative infinity, and I stop touching right here. So all the way through I was touching red. I look at what y value this would be. If I'm looking at the y-axis, this is happening at 2. So I stop touching at y equals 2, and so I'd go to the 2, and since it's a closed circle, I'm going to put a bracket. Then I look at my line again, I keep going, and right here is where I'm touching next. Now I start touching at y equals 6, and you would think maybe I'm not touching at y equals 6 because this is an open circle, except that I am touching in this spot because this is a horizontal line, and that seems kind of confusing because normally open circles should be parentheses. But I'm not touching at this value of 6 for y, but I am touching all the values for 6 over here because it's horizontal. So when I come over and list where else I'm touching, I'm going to say I have a union because I started touching again, and I'm only touching at 6. My line's not going up or down, so I'm touching purely at 6. So I just bracket in that number. And then my set notation for that, I'd say values of y such that, so that's new to us, we haven't done range for that yet. We are always going to say values of y such that, and again I go bottom to top. Here's my first point, which we said happened at 2. And so I'm either going to say y is greater than or equal to 2 or less than or equal to 2. And hopefully seeing this line go down, you'll see that you would write y is less than or equal to 2. And then I'm going to say or, because I touch again. And I look at my next circle, which is right here. And I'm going to say y is greater than 6, y is less than 6, which in this case doesn't make sense, right? Because it's not, the line's not going up or the line's not going down. So actually, when it's a horizontal, y is not greater than or less than 6, it's actually equal to 6 because it was a horizontal line. So we'll say y is equal to 6. You might want to replay a couple of these problems because this is a brand new concept to you, but we will do this with every single graph we do the entire year. We will do set and interval notation. It'll become kind of second nature to you. But right now, it's going to seem a little bit confusing. So if you're a little bit confused, that's totally normal. I'm going to keep going so you can see some more examples. Number 7, again, we have a piecewise function. So I would start with my domain. I work left to right. So am I touching at negative infinity? If you look at that graph to keep going, I am going to be touching there. So I'm going to start my domain at negative infinity. And then I see how far I'm going to keep touching. So I'm touching, touching red, touching red, touching red. Still touching red at that line right here. This is where I stop touching red. And that's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So x is at 5. So I'll do a 5. And since it's a closed circle, I'll use the bracket. I do start touching red again. I can see as I move my line, I'm going to touch another red line. So I'm going to have a union. And where I start touching again would be right here. That's at 6. So I'm going to use a bracket because it's a closed circle. And then if I keep looking as I go across, I'll be touching forever. So look at this arrow as it keeps going here. As I go across, I'm going to keep touching so it goes to positive infinity. And remember, infinity, we always use a parenthesis. Now for set notation, I'm going to say values of x such that, and I look at this point, my first one on the left, and I say where is that occurring at? It's at 5. So x is either going to be less than or equal to 5 or greater than or equal to 5. And hopefully because you're seeing where that red's going, that's going towards the less than. So I would say x is less than or equal to 5 because it's a closed circle. Or, and I look at my other circle, which is right here at 6, is x less than or equal to 6, greater than or equal to 6. And see that arrow going to the right? I would say x is greater than or equal to 6. So that's my domain. To do my range now, excuse me, I'm going to do my purple dash and have that go across. So we'll get this green one out of here again. So as I move this purple line up, am I touching anything down here? I don't see any arrows going down, so I am not touching at negative infinity. So as I move up, I'm not touching anywhere at all, and then right here. This is at negative 2, so I'm touching at y equals negative 2. Now again, we have a horizontal line here. So it is touching not greater than or less than negative 2, just at negative 2. So I'm going to say bracket, negative 2, bracket. I am going to touch again, so I'll have a union. As I move this line up, you'll see I start touching right here at y equals 0. That's 0 on the y-axis. So I will do a bracket with the 0 because I have a closed circle. And then as I move my line up, you'll see that I don't ever stop touching. That goes on forever and ever and ever. As I go up, always touching. So I'm going to say that this goes to positive infinity. For my set notation then for range, I'm going to say values of y such that. And I again start bottom to top. But I'm looking at my circle here. So I look right here. This circle's happening at negative 2. Is y greater than negative 2 or less than negative 2? Well, neither, because this is a horizontal line. It's equal to negative 2. So I would say y equals negative 2, or, and then I come up to my next circle, right here at 0, is y greater than or equal to 0, less than or equal to 0. Well, my line's going this way, so y is going to be greater than or equal to 0. And there's my set and interval notation for that problem. The next one then, you'll see we have a piecewise function again. As I move my domain across, am I touching here? This line's going to continue on forever and ever and ever. So yes, I would start touching at negative infinity. So I'm touching there. As I move across, where do I stop touching? Right here at negative 3 on the x-axis. So I would start with negative infinity, and I stop touching at -3, it's an open circle, so I'm going to put a bracket or a parenthesis with that. And then I do see that I'm going to start touching it, so I'm going to do union. As I move across with my green dashed line again, right here at 0, I start touching again, and that's going to be a parenthesis. And as I move my line across, I can see that I'm going to continue to touch forever as that line goes up. So I'm going to say to positive infinity. My set notation would be values of x such that, and again we look at the circles. This is happening at -3, so is x greater than -3 or less than -3? Well, it's going this way. So x is less than -3. Or, and then I look at the next dot, happening at 0. That's an open circle, so it's either going to be x is greater than 0 or less than 0. Well, the line's going towards the greater than part, so we would say or x is greater than 0. There's my domain. My range then, I'm going to use my purple line again. So as I start in the bottom, I see that I am going to be touching at negative infinity because this line goes on forever. So I start at negative infinity and I stop touching at y equals -2. Negative infinity to -2. And remember, range is your y value, so I'm looking at the y-axis when I decide where I'm stopped. And then that is a open circle, so I'll use a parenthesis, union. As I go up, I stop touching at 1. See on the y-axis that's a 1. So that's, or excuse me, that's where I start touching, so I'll say 1, and I would keep touching. Watch as I go up. Am I always touching y values? I am, forever. So I go to positive infinity. Range for that, values of y such that. So I'm going to again look at my circles. This circle starts at -2. Is it y is greater than -2 or less than -2? Hopefully we see that it's y is less than -2. Or, and I look at my other circle, it's happening at 1. Y is greater than 1 or less than 1? Greater than 1, hopefully we see. So y is greater than 1. And there's number 8. Again, rewind. You might want to rewind that and play it again if I went a little fast for you, so you can just listen to that process one more time. The last one we're going to do together on the video is number 9. And so same process. If you want to pause this and try it and then come back and check your answer, that'd be pretty smart for this. As I move across from my domain, I am touching at negative infinity, and I stop touching right here. So that would be -3 on the x-axis. So I'm going to say I'm touching at negative infinity, and I go all the way to -3, and that is a closed circle, so I'm going to put a bracket there. Union, keep moving across, and I start touching again at 2, not, or a closed circle, so I'll do a bracket or a parenthesis. Start touching at 2 on the x-axis, and then I can see as I go across, I would touch forever. So I'd say 2 to positive infinity. Set notation, values of x such that. Here's that -3. Am I going greater than or equal to -3? Less than or equal to -3? Well, we'd say less than or equal to. So values of x such that x is less than or equal to -3. Or, I come over here at 2. Am I going greater than 2 or less than 2? X is greater than 2. My y values then, I use my purple dash to move up and down. So I'm touching at negative infinity. It doesn't really look like it, but see this arrow here? That's going to keep going forever. So I do start touching at negative infinity. And as I move along my y-axis, I'm touching red, touching red, touching red, touching red until right here. This would be 3 on the y-axis. So I'm going to put a 3 there. And it's an open circle, so that point's not included. So I use the parenthesis. I would have a union, because I touch again. As I move up, I touch right here at 5. And again, this is a horizontal line, so I'm not touching above 5 or below 5, I'm just touching at 5. So we'll do a bracket, 5. So for my set notation, I'd say values of y such that. Look at my first circle that happened at 3. Am I going y is greater than 3 or y is less than 3? I would say y is less than 3. Or, and then I look at my other one, This is at 5. Is y greater than 5 or less than 5? Hopefully you'd say neither, because y is exactly 5. That's the only place it touches. It doesn't go up or down, it's a horizontal line. So y equals 5. So now what I want you to do for tomorrow is I want you to go back to your 2-6 notes day 1 and try the domain and range in both set and interval notation for problems 1 through 4 from your notes. We graphed those together, so you should have the right graphs. Now I want you to check and see if you can do that domain and range. And just try it. If you're wrong, that's fine, but you have to at least think through it so we know what we can fix on it.